All right, looks like we are ready to start. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Nick McCauley, pronouns he, him, his, and I want to thank you all for coming to join us in discussing this important topic on decolonizing academia. And I would also like to thank the philosophy department at American University in particular for offering us the space today. So let's get started. Historically, the colonization of education has been the practice of reconstructing the learning systems of a region with the intent to influence and control those within it. And its historical purpose has been to remodel and reshape the minds of conquered peoples in order to make them more docile and even sometimes complicit in the continuation of their oppression. We've seen this implemented in a variety of populations in the past, from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, and we've seen it wreak havoc in regions such as Rwanda and Israel. But what does it look like in our education system? In what ways does it present itself? And how should we go about countering it? And is there any way for us to unlearn it in favor of learning the truth? So today, that's what we'll be discussing. We'll be discussing the origin of educational colonialism and how it has shaped both our learning processes and academic systems across the globe with 3 AU alumni. That's Angelica Vega, pronoun she, hers, Maria Gramajo, pronoun she, hers, and Susana Saldiaga Arango, she, hers. They'll be engaging in a research-focused discussion detailing how ingrained this oppressive practice is in our lives and how we can work together to dismantle it. We'll also be joined by La Fundación Pachasana, an organization who has made it their mission to fight for decolonized education through a community-centric approach. So I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, Angelica Vega, pronoun she, hers. She's a recent philosophy graduate at the American University and is the winner of the Pearson Prize for Excellence in Philosophy and a digital organizer for the Black Lives Matter movement. She's the type of person you need to follow because she's definitely going places. Angelica?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Nick. I am excited to be here today discussing this very important topic. I believe it is critical that we all understand how knowledge gets produced and verified, and how white supremacy and the patriarchy dictates who gets to be in the academic space. As a Black woman with a disability, I often find myself in spaces where people either try to invalidate or explain my own experiences to me. In the realm of academia, this gets even worse. According to Callis, women held nearly half of all tenure track positions in 2018. However, they held just barely 39% of tenure position. And for Black women in particular, they only held barely under 4% of tenure track position and around 2% of tenure position. These statistics are disheartening. Restricting any group of people from pursuing academic work means stifling the advancement of society as a whole. Today, I'll be talking about one of my favorite works, which I have the pleasure of reading last semester, Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Hill Collins. Black Feminist Thought is a 1990s book by Patricia Hill Collins, a distinguished university professor at the University of Maryland, and it focused on systems of power and Black women's experience with systems of oppression. In chapter 10 of her book, she examined how Eurocentric ideals in academic settings control structure of knowledge validation while discrediting many Black women's experiences. The first half of chapter 10 focused on epistemology, which is the study of knowledge and knowledge production. According to Collins, Black women have historically been limited in their freedom to define themselves in traditional spaces of former knowledge production. As a result, Black women have found other spaces for self-definition like music, literature, and daily conversation. We like to think of former academic settings like universities as the ultimate foundation of truth and knowledge. But as Collins pointed out, Eurocentric and patriarchal dominance is embedded in academia, in a form of knowledge validation and a strict research criteria. This is how they dismiss experiences of Black women and place limits on who gets to produce and verify knowledge. They employ two major criteria while validating research. Non-honest claims must be evaluated by a community of experts, and each community of experts must maintain its credibility as defined by the larger group's already established knowledge. Given their history of excluding women and people of color, the foundation of established knowledge they refer to, and the community of experts that maintains it are both heavily flawed and skewed with Eurocentric supremacy and patriarchal standards. The specific rules that they enforce as methodological criteria for research include some of the following: distancing the research from the object of study, excluding emotion from the research process, and avoiding the inclusion of debates as the preferred method of asserting truth. These exclusionary practices especially tell Black researchers that they cannot be expert of our own lived experiences, though their expectation that we reject our emotion and distance ourselves from the topic being studied, no matter how relevant those aspects often are to the study. College shows us that academic settings have been tainted by Eurocentric supremacy and the patriarchy through strict research criteria, quote unquote, established knowledge from the community of experts, and a history of exclusionary practices towards women of color. I won't spoil the rest of the chapter for you all, but I highly recommend you read Colin's work for yourself if you're interested in learning more about the subjects. In today's society, universities and academic settings need to acknowledge their history of exclusion towards many marginalized communities. Alongside this, we must advocate for revision of outdated research policy to prevent further oppression and widening the knowledge production space outside the university settings, while establishing long-term funding opportunity towards communities of color who want to get into academia, and advocating for women of color to get tenure positions at universities. These goals are only the first steps towards changing the nature of academia for the better. Our lived experiences are valid, and academia needs to change to reflect that simple truth. Let's work together to make this change and amplify our voices so that they may be heard around the world. Thank you for having me.
Wow, thank you so much, Angelica, for your philosophical aspects and also your explanation of Collins's work. Please, for everyone in the audience, please read some of her work. It's really revolutionary, definitely worth the read. So our second speaker today is Maria Gramajo, and her pronouns are she, her, hers. She's a recent graduate of American University with a BA in American Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. Maria?
Thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone for being here today. I will be talking about Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Eve Tuck and Kay Wayne Yang. I suggest you all read the piece. I love it. Tuck and Yang discuss how the decolonial desires of white, non-white, immigrant, post-colonial, and oppressed people can similarly be entangled in resettlement, reoccupation, and re-inhabitation that further settler colonialism. And I wanted to highlight a quote from page 3, which reads, "When metaphor invades decolonization, it kills the very possibility of decolonization. It recenters whiteness, it resettles theory, it extends innocence to the settler, it entertains a settler future. Decolonization does not have a synonym." This means that decolonization as a metaphor allows people to turn it into an empty signifier to be filled by any track towards liberation, which is simply not the case. I also want to make sure that we talk about educational spaces. There's often little recognition of settler colonialism, indigenous people, and their recognition for sovereignty as well as Native intellectuals and activist contributions to theories of decolonization. I think it's also important to think about how schooling has and still is a mode of control to ensure the ascendancy of the settler nation state and the ascendancy of white elites. Lastly, land is made into property, and human relationships to land are restricted to the relationship of the owner and his property. My next slide is on language use. So language of decolonization has been adopted into education, especially higher education, with ease, which is concerning given that it's taught as the same as other forms of justice and social justice projects, which is simply not the case. Decolonization is very different. Decolonization is far more than simply decolonizing your mind or your bookshelf, etc. Decolonization is about giving land back, and academia is complicit in refusing to include that. Human experience has always been taught to us from a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal frame of thinking that renders indigenous people invisible, which is inherently violent. Settler colonial states teach us false histories, and Native peoples are still here and their histories need to be shared. Decolonization is accountable to indigenous sovereignty and futurity, and currently Native Americans make up less than 1% of US inhabitants, and I encourage you all to look into why that is the case if you don't already know. Ask yourself whose land you're on. Lastly, I want to leave you with something Fanon said in 1963, which is that decolonizing the mind is the first step, not the only step towards overthrowing colonial regimes. Decolonizing the mind is still comfortable. Critical consciousness does not translate into action that will disrupt a settler state. We must return land. Again, this is a quick summary, so I encourage you all to read the work and work through Tuck and Yang's piece, as well as read other Native scholars' pieces. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Maria. It's great that you have that insight. And then I just wanted to talk about and reinforce the fact that, dismantling colonized education systems definitely starts with introspection and changing one's mindset. So I agree with that. I think you hit a good point there. So we have another speaker today. Next, we have Susana Saldayaga Arango. Her pronouns are she, her, hers. In Colombia and raised in Costa Rica, and she's been in the US for 8 years. She came to know about and understand Decolonizing Academia through her experience in Fundación Pachesana's study abroad program, and has been interested in radical liberation work ever since. Susanna?
Thank you, Nick. In the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire declares, "The radical committed to human liberation does not become the prisoner of a circle of certainty within which reality is also imprisoned." What Freire means by this quote is that the radical individual, who should be committed to liberation and liberation pedagogy, would understand that knowledge is not static and that certainty is an illusion. This radical understanding of knowledge is one of the positions Freire uses to explain how and why our current educational system is oppressive. Currently, Freire argues, we operate under a system that he calls banking education. He uses this term in order to denote a way of educating whereby the teacher or expert deposits knowledge to the students. Not only is this ineffective, but it is also violent and colonizing. It presumes a lack of knowledge by part of the student and an absolute knowledge from the teacher. It reinforces the idea that those who have not had a formal education do not know what those with a formal education know. Freire argues that in order to liberate and decolonize education, we must get rid of this illusory hierarchical relationship between teacher-student. This means that we must come to see, understand, and practice an education that recognizes that a teacher is also a student, and that a student is also a teacher, always, simultaneously. Learning and education should be a dialogue, not a monologue, because each and every one of us knows things and different types of things, because we all have experiences and lives, and these are the ways in which we learn. But the barrier we have constructed with the hierarchical teacher-student relationship is not the only one we must take down. Education, particularly universities and colleges, must take down the barriers that provide an illusion of isolation between the education they provide and the communities and peoples that have and continue to exist in the places that these institutions are located. For example, I went to American University, AU for short, which is located in Washington, D.C., on the territories of the Piscataway, Powhatan, and Nanticoke peoples. However, I did not really interact with the community of DC during my first 2 years in the city, and did not know the names of the tribes on whose land I was living up until this week. I also didn't hear a land acknowledgement more than once during the course of my education. In fact, my time at AU was spent pretty isolated. I did not have to engage with the history and violence of the place or interact with the people who made my living there possible. For example, the picture on the slide shows a worker in the terrace dining room, TDR, of AU, a place I attended on a daily basis during my first 2 years when I lived on campus. I saw the people who worked there regularly, and yet I never got to know their names, never sat in a classroom with them, never heard what their experiences, lives, or knowledge were. And I would wager that a lot of my peers had the same experience. And that's because education has been sanitized, made comfortable and easy for those who can afford it. Because mainstream education is not about breaking down the systems of oppression, about decolonizing, it is about upholding them. We are made to believe that we learn in a vacuum, and this is just not reality. It was only during my 3rd year of college, when studying abroad in Ecuador under Fundación Pachaysana, that I received an education that broke down these fantasies, these barriers, and where I was first introduced not only to the idea, but also the praxis of decolonizing education. So I leave you with this quote from Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak's Death of a Discipline. When we seem to have won or lost in terms of certainties, we must, as literature teachers in the classroom, remember such warnings. Let literature teach us that there are no certainties, that the process is open and it may be all together salutary that it is so.
Well, thank you so much for that, Susanna. Reevaluating the relationship dynamics between teachers and students is definitely key in rebooting the current learning structures that we have, for sure. And also that reading that you referenced is really top-notch. I encourage everybody to read that. So now I'll be turning things over to Grace and Chelsea, who will be discussing their education organization, La Fundación Pachaysana, and their role in reversing the effects of colonized learning systems. You can go ahead, Grace.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you as well, Susana, Maria, Angelica, the AU Philosophy Department, all involved for inviting us. We're very excited to be here today. So my name is Grace Logan. My pronouns are she, hers, and I have been working as a fellow with Fundación Pachaysana in Ecuador for the past 2 years. Today we'll be discussing our experience as an organization that attempts to put decolonization into action, conflicts we've encountered along the way, and lessons learned. So you've heard a little bit about us already from Susana, but who is Pachaysana? Our name is the combination of 2 Quechua words. Quechua is an indigenous language of Ecuador, and these words are Pacha, which is commonly translated as world or the space-time that we inhabit, and Aysana, which is balance. So this is indicative of our vision. We seek to create or be a part of the creation of a more just and balanced world. And the way that we seek to do this is through education. So we are a collective of Ecuadorian and international educators, artists, and community organizers who seek to reimagine and decolonize education using creative community-based educational programming. We have a study abroad program called Rehearsing Change, in which I was a participant as well as Susana. And our main focus through that program is decolonizing the academy through study abroad. So I'll now pass the mic to my coworker, Chelsea Viteri, who is resident director of Rehearsing Change, to tell us a little more about the program and the importance of story in our work.
Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea Viteri. My pronouns are she, hers. And I wanted to start by sharing this phrase. The violence present in our colonial education may feel subtle. but the target is the very essence of our humanity. It is against our collective self-determination, or it is against our story. And a lot of you have already mentioned different elements of the importance of considering epistemologies and ways of knowing and being when we're imagining a more just world. And the way that we seek to do this in our work is through stories. Because through stories, you also have an entry point to have a diverse group of people participate and not necessarily solely be like directed towards maybe like a university student audience, but you know, community. And when we think about story, try to even like just imagine your life. Like just even an hour of your life without story. You can't really do so because we need story like we need food. The way that we process the world is through the stories that we tell ourselves. So when we think of decolonizing, it is imperative to think about dismantling the dominant narrative, the dominant story. And how do we do that? We question, we re-story, we create new stories that might be able to be more representative of who we are and who we want to be, and give us recognition of what has happened. So an example that I can give you all is, what does it mean to be American? Or what is the story behind being American? And how could we decolonize the notion of who is or isn't an American? And we could think about that in a US context. And we could also think of it, of right now we're here in Ecuador in the American continent. So people living here could also maybe be American, right? So I think I just wanted to share this part of story because it's a foundational part of our methodology in striving to decolonize the way we do education. And before sharing a little bit about the messiness of it, and for you to be able to visualize what we do a little bit more, we're actually going to use the elements of story to share with you how it is that we do this work. So basic elements are like the who, the how, the what, and the where. So now I'm going to pass it back to Grace, and she's going to share with us a little bit about this.
Thanks, Chel. So as Chelsea was saying, there are these basic elements of a story. But a story isn't just, something you read in a book, it's what we are living every day. So when we talk about decolonizing education, decolonizing this dominant narrative of education, what does that look like in these 4 parts? So to start out, who do we do education with? As many of our fellow panelists mentioned, access is a huge problem in universities. Who does and does not have access to these spaces of higher education? We are intentional in inviting diverse peoples and voices, often those who are ignored or devalued by higher education, into our spaces. So we work with Ecuadorian communities, which themselves are a very diverse group. We work with urban collectives, rural communities of place, indigenous communities, mestizo communities, as well as international students from the United States. However, access is not the only barrier. What we often see, for example, in diversity and inclusion initiatives in universities in the States and abroad, is an attempt to bring diverse or marginalized peoples into the system, but then expecting them to adapt to the system. What we advocate for and what we strive to embody through our education is this idea that everyone is a knower and everyone does have valuable experiences, knowledge, and wisdom to bring into our spaces, and therefore should have power in our processes, power to change what we are doing and to influence the way that we do education. So how do we do this education? So we seek to mirror the reality of our world by bringing these diverse lives together to share, create, and dialogue. We view our spaces as rehearsal rooms for life that are accessible and that are relevant to multiple realities. All of the work is creative. We use methodologies such as theater of the oppressed, art for social change, which are not only more accessible and relevant to more realities than, for example, the dominant way of expressing knowledge in universities, which is written work, but they also, we believe, allow for a deeper exploration of conflict. All of our work is also collective, project-focused, and community-based. A really important point to hit home here is that knowledge is created and not received. We call our instructors or educators facilitators, and we do that intentionally. Susanna talked about this a little bit, but everyone's a student and teacher in our spaces. And facilitators, we don't see ourselves as the holders of knowledge to impart on other people, but the facilitators of a creative process in which knowledge is created. Which brings us to what actually do we learn in our classrooms? What we learn comes exactly from this intercultural exchange with other participants. The community also plays a key role in building the syllabus of our courses and in co-designing the content. We thoughtfully and deliberately integrate diverse kinds of expressions and knowledge into the curriculum as well. An important maybe point of conflict that I want to bring up here is, as I was talking about balance before, as an intercultural organization, I think we're often trying to balance between, you know, the world of US universities and the world of Ecuadorian communities, but we're also trying to balance between the world that we exist in and the world that we want to create. And this does create a lot of points of conflict. So for example, when we talk about the content of our courses, we have to negotiate with the dominant university system. That means that we have to have content that is, on one hand, challenging and rigorous as defined by the universities, and on the other hand, accessible and relevant to all of our participants. So again, we're back to this, in the real world, having to find this balance between these different worlds, the one we live in and the one that we want to create. And finally, where do we do education? We do education in the community. So learning spaces are chosen and designed by community participants, and they're designed in a very intentional way that encourages movement and play and creation, instead of how maybe most of us are used to seeing a classroom, which is more designed to encourage absorption or stillness and discipline. So this was just a little bit of our story of how we restory education, how we envision decolonizing education in our context. So now I'm going to pass it on over to Chell again to talk about some more conflict in our work.
Great. So another really important part of a story is conflict, right? You can't have a story without conflict. And if you were to have a story without conflict, it's probably going to be a not really interesting story. So we strive to explore and understand conflict as also like opportunity to expand and to grow. And also as a way of interacting with reality. It's going to be conflicting sometimes. And we wanted to bring this up in this presentation just to also, share with you all that the work is messy, and the process of striving to decolonize our spaces and our classrooms and our community-based relationships is a process. And it's like more so like a commitment of everyday rethinking and questioning and reflecting and making mistakes as well. So when we think of engaging in these processes, it's another really important question is like, how can we like humanize the other? How can we also have empathy? How can we work through mistakes? How can we work through the uncomfortability of maybe not having it perfect? Because it's also, when we think of decolonizing, it is a process that we don't have a clear-cut model for. It doesn't have like a formula of do these steps and you'll be there. So sometimes that can be hard, but it's also where all the growth and the actual work takes place. When we're in conflict, when we're in the messiness of it all. And it's, yeah, also a really important part of story and how we envision walking in this path. Also being committed to the conflict that is gonna arise, rather than the perfection that we wanna achieve something. So now for our last slide, we wanted to share with you all some of like the lessons learned in our time with Pachaisana in this journey. So Grace, are you gonna get us started?
Yeah, sure. So this first lesson is decolonization is a process that needs to be embodied versus a product that needs to be accepted. So we view decolonization as kind of this constant and renewing cycle of learning and unlearning, of reflection informing action, informing reflection. So decolonization is what we do. It's what we do day to day, but it's not where we're trying to arrive.
Yeah, another one is decolonizing can only happen in relationship. It's really hard to envision decolonizing on your own. And even if you're thinking on your own, it's maybe like the relationship to yourself, the relationship to your emotions, to your mind, to the land, to people, right? And so cultivating meaningful relationships based on respect, reciprocity, accountability, and joy is essential. So relationships are another really important part of our work. More than any type of outcome, it really is the community and family that we can build together. And a really important point of this is celebration and joy, because sometimes spaces, if they lack this part of celebrating together and eating together and breaking bread together, it's hard to really envision building communities of justice, of love, of care. So I just wanted to highlight the joy and the celebration part of relationships.
So number 3 is our resistance is based on collective creation. We strive to simultaneously dismantle oppressions and create just alternatives. An example of this is our study abroad program, Rehearsing Change. So we don't just critique, criticize, or attempt to dismantle existing study abroad, but we resist by creating something new, something that we view as more just. And that kind of, returning to the theme of the story, this is an example of restorying. Rehearsing Change is our attempt to restory study abroad.
And lastly, we will make mistakes. And it is important in these moments of mistakes, accountability is, we need to embrace accountability as well. But see them also as opportunities of growth rather than allowing like guilt to overtake and to make us stagnant almost. So yeah, that's what we wanted to share with you all from Pachaisana. Thank you very much. I don't know, Grace, if you want to add something or if we're...
No, thank you. Yeah, I think there's just this one more slide of if anyone wants to reach out, contact us, stay updated on our work. We have our website here, our email, as well as our social media platforms. So thank you all. We really appreciate being included in this conversation.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Grace and Chelsea, for your really poignant final points. I love everything that you guys stand for as individuals and obviously everything your organization stands for sure. So this concludes our presentation. I hope you all have gathered the necessary knowledge and tools to help in decolonizing learning systems and learning habits. Though it is seemingly harmless, colonized learning is violent. And in allowing it to continue, we allow societies to continuously undermine and misrepresent the narratives and lived experiences of oppressed people. This we cannot allow. So I want to say thank you so much for all of the wonderful speakers on this line today. And what we will be doing, we'll be doing a Q&A session following up with that. So before we do begin the Q&A session though, I want to give a big thanks to obviously La Fundación Pachisana, Liam Sullivan, pronouns he, him, his, Jonathan Bergman, again, he, him, his, and Jade Ramcharan, she, hers, for helping everybody out. This never would have happened without them. I would also like to give a big shout out to Michelle Keeble, she, hers, for being our ASL interpreter. Again, thank you so much, Michelle. Please support her services. She's amazing. Her contact information is in the slide below as well. Oh, and also thank you to everyone who has helped us off the screen. Everyone has brought great energy to this presentation, and we really, really appreciate it.